Warning: this is a story told based on rumors reported from that era, including the names of people and places that were changed to preserve the memory of those possibly involved. Any similarity to real names and places is mere coincidence. That said, Pastor Thomas Whitmore and his fiancée were beginning to engage in scandalous behavior. Ohio, 1883. The pastor who shared his fiancée with 5 members of the congregation. In the winter of 1883, the small community of Millbrook, Ohio, would have been the scene of events that, according to reports, deeply shook the moral foundations of that rural society. Reverend Thomas Whitmore, the central figure of this reported story, was an apparently 38-year-old man who had led the local Baptist congregation for nearly a decade. Whitmore, they say, presented himself as an example of moral rectitude before his faithful. A widower for 6 years after losing his wife during childbirth complications, he dedicated himself entirely to religious ministry and the charitable works that sustained the church. His reputation as an eloquent preacher and spiritual counselor had crossed county borders. You are watching Uncle Thomas's Cabin channel, the only place where stories are told without filters. Leave your comment saying where you are watching from. We want to know how our audience around the world is doing. Subscribe now to receive more content as interesting as this. In September of that year, according to some reports, Whitmore announced his engagement to Sarah Mitchell, a 23-year-old young woman newly arrived in town. Sarah, an orphan since adolescence, worked as a governess in wealthy residences and had quickly won the sympathy of the most influential members of the congregation. The wedding was scheduled for December, and the entire community was preparing enthusiastically for the celebration. What no one imagined was that behind that facade of religious normality, a situation was developing that would defy any moral understanding of the time. 5 members of the church's administrative council, married men aged between 35 and 50, would have established with the Reverend and his fiancée an arrangement absolutely incomprehensible by prevailing social standards. These 5 men, they say, maintained regular and intimate encounters with Sarah Mitchell, and such encounters occurred with the explicit knowledge of Reverend Whitmore himself. The locations varied between the pastoral residence itself, the church basement after evening services, and occasionally discreet establishments on the outskirts of town. The exact nature of these meetings remained obscure for months. Apparently, those involved publicly justified these encounters as extended spiritual counseling sessions or administrative meetings related to the congregation's finances. The community, confident in the integrity of their pastor and the most prominent church members, did not question these explanations. Various rumors try to explain Reverend Whitmore's motivations for allowing such a degrading situation. According to reports, he could have been blackmailed by the 5 men who would have discovered some compromising secret from his past. Other accounts suggest that the pastor had accumulated significant debts in the construction of the church's new wing and would be using his fiancée as bargaining currency to obtain continued financial support from those influential men. There are even those who say that Whitmore suffered from some undiagnosed mental disturbance, which would lead him to find morbid satisfaction in that deplorable arrangement. Speculation aside, the fact would have been that for approximately 4 months, this extraordinary situation remained hidden from the eyes of most of the faithful. The revelation of the scandal would have occurred unexpectedly. They say that Margaret Sullivan, wife of one of the 5 men involved, discovered compromising letters in her husband's office. Consumed by despair and fury, she would have taken the correspondence directly to the regional bishop, the highest authority of the denomination in that region of Ohio.
The bishop, deeply shocked by the content of the letters and the accounts presented by Margaret, immediately initiated a confidential investigation. Witnesses were heard in secret, documents were examined, and gradually, according to reports, the full extent of the situation was revealing itself in all its disturbing dimension. When the investigation results became public, the community of Millbrook would have plunged into absolute social chaos. Families were divided, decades-long friendships were abruptly broken, and the congregation itself fragmented into hostile factions. Some members defended the reverend, arguing that he must be the victim of malicious conspiracy. The majority, however, felt deeply betrayed and deceived.
Reverend Thomas Whitmore was formally removed from his ministerial duties in a humiliating public ceremony. The 5 men on the council faced equally severe consequences. 3 lost their marriages, 2 were expelled from their own families, and all saw their reputations completely destroyed in that conservative community. Sarah Mitchell, according to some reports, disappeared from Millbrook just days after the scandal erupted. They say she would have left without notifying anyone, leaving all her belongings behind. Unconfirmed rumors suggested that she might have traveled to Cincinnati or even beyond Ohio's borders, seeking to start over where no one knew her story. Whitmore's ecclesiastical trial took place over tense weeks. Multiple witnesses presented their testimonies, letters were read publicly, and sordid details emerged progressively. The former reverend, they say, remained practically silent throughout the entire process, offering only vague apologies and incoherent explanations that no one considered satisfactory. Whitmore left Millbrook in early 1884. According to reports, he would have settled in some distant city using a false name, working in modest occupations that did not require references or professional history. Other rumors, never confirmed, suggested that he would have committed suicide months later, unable to live with the shame and complete social isolation. This episode remained as an indelible stain on Millbrook's history. The Baptist congregation took years to fully recover, having lost more than half of its members in the months following the scandal. New leadership was established, and deliberate efforts were made to erase any public trace of those disturbing events. The older generations of Millbrook, they say, kept this story as a shameful secret that was rarely mentioned in open conversations. It became that type of dark episode that families knew about but avoided discussing, especially in the presence of children or visitors from outside the community. To this day, according to some descendants of those families, there is no absolute consensus on all the details of what really would have happened in that winter of 1883. What remains is the memory of how an entire community had its trust betrayed by those who should have represented the highest moral and spiritual conduct. Choose now one of those options that are appearing on your screen and continue with us. Until the next video.